Hello YouTube. In this hypertrophy series, we're going to discuss the best way to determine the optimized length of the training session. And that can be applied for novices up to advanced lifters because the formula stays the same. And you will see that I'm going to use elements that I've already explained in the hypertrophy series. And it's going to make a ton of sense because all of the concepts and the principles I've introduced are going to go perfectly together to permit you to actually go through that calculus and determine when the session should end. Keep in mind that all of that is going to work and function under the overarching idea that the session should be as short as possible. We need to shrink the session and do as much as possible within as short of a time span as we can because time is money. At some point, it's not going to be realistic to spend 5 hours in the gym. And regardless of if you had the time or not, you will see that it's counterproductive. So we want to be in there for as few hours as possible. And that is also practical because the more advanced you become, the less it is possible to just push strength forever, the tougher it is to rely on intensity to actually grow and accumulate tonnage, and the more you have to apply modifications of volume and frequency. And for volume, sometimes the only way to add reps is to add sets, and adding sets is adding time. Same for frequency. If you want to add windows of tonnage somewhere in the schedule, guess what? That means it's time you're going to have to spend training. And at some point, if that expands too much, you are going to get completely lost because you cannot train for 4 hours. It's not practical. And so, every single time we program, we need to make sure that we don't waste any second and that everything we do is condensed like a diamond. It's under pressure so that we only keep what is necessary and what is going to drive progression. Keep in mind that this does not mean that we're going to be minimalistic. We're not just going to stick to strength work, we'll have a plethora of accessories and variations, but they will be programmed intelligently and we'll get just what we need so that we can progress without really going above and beyond what is necessary in terms of maximum recoverable volume. So, for this episode, the concepts we're going to use are the concept of baseline, the concept of maximum recoverable volume, and the concept of set multiplication. And you'll see that it is extremely simple. The way to determine when the session should end is when you get to a point where your ability to go back to baseline cannot meet the requirements of your relative intensity in terms of intensity window. In layman terms, that means that at some point in the training, you will start moving weights that have stopped being relevant in relation to the absolute intensity, which is the max weight you can move, which is determined by the strength work that opens the workout. This is why the strength work is so important. It's because it's going to guide the rest of the training. I've used that example before. But if on your strength work for squats, you squat 300 pounds, and you realize that at some point in the training you do some variation of the back squat and you use 150 pounds, you might have dug too deep. And it was already time for you to pack up and go home. And you will find, of course, that the more advanced you are, regardless of your individual predispositions, the lengthier the sessions are going to become. If you're a novice, there really is no point in training for 2 hours. I guarantee you that you're doing a lot of junk volume. And you can really get away with 40-minute training sessions. That being said, never let anyone tell you that your sessions are too short or too long. As long as the session wills progression, you're fine. But if you're unsure, the best way to be sure is to follow that practice. So, now that the quote-unquote formula was presented, practically what does that mean? Well, it means that you're going to come in, you're going to do your strength work, and then you're going to do a number of variation of back-off sets of accessories that are going to get you there. Because in reality, and that is a very easy way to explain muscle building and muscle training, is that your goal when you jump in and you go into the gym is to damage the muscle fibers so that they lose the ability to go back to baseline, or at least a relevant baseline. Because as I will explain to you, you really cannot destroy the ability of the muscle to go back to baseline entirely. That would really require you to get injured, even crippled, because you will always be able to do another squat with your body weight. It's not possible to train so hard that someone who can squat 5 plates now cannot even do one body weight squat. But that would be going way too deep into completely irrelevant intensity windows. So you do your training, you look at what you moved at the start of the workout, and when you are, I don't know, 4 sets in, 8 sets in, and you realize that the amount of movements, the amount of muscle groups you wanted to hit for that day have now reached a point where they have lost that ability to move anything relevant, pack it up, go home. That's pretty much that. And you only really have to pay attention to the baseline, as I said, the intensity window, because that's also going to dictate when your baseline is really going to start to fail you, because it's not really going to push you back into any relevant intensity windows. And all of that, to me, is really what is going to be your maximum recoverable volume, because there is an issue with looking at what the body can take in terms of future recovery, because you're going to lose sight of the present. The maximum recoverable volume, for the most part, is going to be linked to that, and I would encourage you to not think about it too much. Too many people are going to be training, and at some point the anxiety is going to creep in, and they're going to think, oh, am I pushing myself too much? Am I doing something that is going to damage my ability to recover? And the answer, for the most part, is going to be no. Most people don't go above and beyond, and unless you're a novice and you do what I presented before, where you train for too long, it's not really going to be something that you need to worry about during the training, because your failure to stop the session when it was needed is going to be presented and highlighted by the fact that you are going to be shown afterwards that you overachieved and that you went way above the maximum recoverable volume. But the issue is that this is something that can only really be seen or diagnosed afterwards. And to me, that's the reason why I don't really prescribe you that type of practice, is because I want you to have a way to determine within the training when it should end. And the beauty of that too is you might think, okay, but just like with the maximum recoverable volume, this is something that I need to do every single time I train. And the answer is, of course not, because your baseline is not going to widely fluctuate. Once you have established once where it stands, now every single other day in the program that follows the same template for the same muscle groups and similar movements, which is basically a way to say the same day that is going to repeat itself, can be treated the same way. You know that your baseline is there. It's not going to go there the next week. So you know that your goal is going to slowly hinge it so that you keep pushing progression and you keep diving deep within that baseline. And you might find too that if you apply certain rep ranges that work well, your baseline is not really going to change. You'll find that the number of sets you need, because they evolve, because they grow, because of progressive overload, is not going to be all over. And this is something to keep in mind. What I just described really is slow progression, which entails also that the tendency to multiply sets or the tendency to have to bump the volume or the frequency is going to be a rare occurrence, because what I explained is that you are going to be in between brackets where the baseline is going to stay, and because what is within the brackets evolve up because you progressively overload the movements in it, the baseline is also going to stay stationary. And the day where you're going to have to expand those brackets and put more sets and volume in there to challenge the baseline more is the day where simply adding weight to the pre-existing set is not going to be realistic. I can tell you one thing: when you reach a certain amount of flexibility and diversity in the program, those brackets are going to be stationary, meaning that a perfect program has the baseline immovable, because what is inside is already so complete that it is all you need. So now, instead of having to expand horizontally, which is what a lot of people do, where they slap extra sets, extra days, etc., you just evolve vertically and the tonnage just goes up like this. And that is the goal that you need to reach in your program, in my opinion. It's not realistic when you are starting to program for yourself, but eventually it is very necessary. And this practice, because everything connects together, is also going to avoid any risk of doing junk volume. Because as long as you pay attention to that baseline within the relevant intensity window, you will never do a worthless set. Every single set is going to slowly dig into that baseline. When you're done, when you've met that bracket on the right, it's time to go home. And because you're going to meet that bracket again and again with the same exercises, it's going to be engraved in here. It's going to be something that you're going to become really good at seeing. You won't even have to think about it much. You won't have to take a piece of paper to write it down. At some point, it's going to become second nature. But that is something that needs to be practiced. So this is it for this video on how to determine the optimized length of the training session. It really is not complicated. You will see that I'm going to come up with more of these videos where I take pre-existing principles that I introduced for the very reason that I have overarching concepts of training that are very important that I will be able to present in very easy terms now that you have understood the concepts that needed to be presented first and foremost, so that the entire discussion is clear-cut. So I'm going to leave you with that. If you have any questions or if you want to discuss certain details in the comments, let me know. Have a good day.